Welcome to the Big Sky. I'm Anthony Crescenzo. We are finally going to see some conference matchups that count this weekend. Winners from the last non-con weekend are Cal Poly, Montana State, Sac State, Weber, and Portland State crushed COI 63-14. Stats Special Teams Player of the Week for this week is Sacramento State's punter, Owen Houlihan. The Australian was nearly flawless this weekend in Sac State's 3-point win over Northern Colorado. He pinned the Bears inside their own 20-yard line 6 out of his 8 punts. His final punt was in the closing seconds of the game, a 50-yarder which backed up the kick returner and led to a muff, which the Hornets were able to recover. They say defense wins games, but when the defense has a 76-yard advantage going in, special teams are really helping out. Since we are finally going into conference action this weekend, let's look at the standings for right now. FCS number 6 sits at number 1, that's Eastern Washington, and they lead the conference, followed by number 21, UC Davis Aggies, number 19, Montana Grizzlies, Sac State, the Bobcats, and FCS number 7, Weber State, is at number 6 spot in the conference. Idaho, Idaho State, Portland State, NAU, Cal Poly, Southern Utah, and Northern Colorado, and just for fun, let's say it, the Bears. That's how we're rounding out the conference right now. For this weekend, you're going to love the matchups. Sac State at Montana, Cal Poly will visit the Eags, Idaho State goes to North Dakota. Remember North Dakota? Of course you do. The Bears will meet up with Weber State. The Vandals will invade UC Davis, Southern Utah with NAU, and the Bobcats will fight the Vikings. Check out the games this weekend and let us know who we should be covering more. For the Conference Whiparound, I'm Anthony Crescenzo.
The Colonial Athletic Association had another statement week and have staked themselves as one of the deepest conferences in the FCS. After this weekend, Maine remains the only unbeaten team after having the week off. They were joined by Elon and William and Mary. Let's take a look at last week's games. New Hampshire was run over by Colorado 45-14. The one bright spot for the Wildcats was safety Pop Lacey, who had 10 tackles and an interception return for a touchdown. In what was a surprisingly high-scoring affair, Towson took down Villanova in a stunning upset 45-35. In a game that had over 1,000 yards of total offense, running back Shane Smith gained 201 all-purpose yards, adding 2 touchdowns for Towson. Delaware put up a strong performance on both sides of the ball as they beat Cornell 27-10. Wide receiver Joe Walker set his career highs with 6 receptions and 154 yards with a touchdown. Stony Brook blew out Fordham 28-6. Running backs Jordan Gowans and Donald Leontine combined to run for over 250 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Albany was able to squeak past Morgan State 30-27. Wide receiver Devin Holmes had 238 receiving yards, which included his game-winning 88-yard touchdown reception. Richmond was able to pull out a tough one against St. Francis 35-27. Wide receiver Dejon Brissett had 104 receiving yards and had a 94-yard kick return for a touchdown. James Madison ran through Robert Morris 73-7. This was a strong team offensive performance. They put up 667 yards of total offense. In what was one of the best games in all of college football, Rhode Island lost a heartbreaker to UConn 56-49. In what was a back-and-forth battle, quarterback Jawan Lawson was sensational. He threw for 351 yards, ran for 85, and combined to have 6 total touchdowns. With their 2-1 start, URI has put the CAA on notice. Rhode Island's looking to be the Elon of this season for the conference. Now let's take a look at this week's slate of games. Delaware heads out to Fargo to take on the defending national champs, North Dakota State. Maine will go on the road to take on FBS opponent, Central Michigan. James Madison will play host to conference foe, William and Mary. Villanova will look to bounce back as they host Bucknell. Stony Brook and Richmond will both look to keep it rolling as they face off on Long Island. Elon will travel to Charleston to take on Charleston Southern. And finally, Albany will play home against St. Francis. I'm Ryan Griffith with your CAA Conference Whiparound. Enjoy the games.
It's that time of year again, folks. The sun is setting earlier, the children are going back to school, and Starbucks has started putting pumpkin spice back on their menu, which can only mean one thing. Ivy League football is back, and we are here and jumping right back into the action. We pick up the action with last year's Ivy League champions Yale, traveling to Massachusetts to take on Holy Cross. This was a wild one as Yale blew an early 21-0 lead, sparked by a 100-yard kickoff return touchdown on the opening kickoff by Melvin Roos. Holy Cross would answer, though, as they had the game within a touchdown with less than a minute left. Enter Jeff Wade, who connected with Spencer Gilliam on a 30-yard touchdown pass with 52 seconds left on the clock to send the game into overtime. Holy Cross kicker Derek Ung sealed the game in overtime with nailing a 45-yard field goal, sealing the game 31-28 for the Crusaders and spoiling the Bulldogs' season opener. Next up, we saw Harvard host the defending Pioneer League champion San Diego Toreros. Harvard came out of the gates firing on all cylinders, taking a commanding 27-3 first quarter lead behind running back Aiden Shamplin's 4-touchdown, 178-yard performance. The Crimson ran away with this one 36-14. Cornell headed to Delaware this week to take on the Blue Hens in Tubby Raymond Field at Delaware Stadium. The Big Reds struggled to keep up with UDell's offense as they were shredded by wide receiver Joe Walker, who had 6 catches for 154 yards and a touchdown. Cornell will start off the year 0-1 as they drop this game 27-10. Columbia took a drive down the road this week to take on Central Connecticut State in their season opener. This game started off as a back-and-forth affair as both teams traded blows in the first half, with Columbia taking a 17-14 lead into the third quarter. After the half, Columbia never looked back, as their balanced offensive attack erupted for 24 second-half points, highlighted by a 83-yard touchdown run by Dante Miller. The Lions were easily able to close this game out by a final score of 41-24. Penn played host to Bucknell for their season opener on Saturday. Penn took the lead early in the first quarter and never looked back as they held the lead for the entire game. They were able to stay in front by the efforts of junior running back Kerrigan Brooks, who ran for 72 yards and 2 touchdowns in this one. Penn took care of Bucknell handily, beating them by a final score of 34-17. Brown made the cross-country trip out to San Luis Obispo, California to take on the Mustangs of Cal Poly. The Bears picked up right where they left off last year, getting blown out by the Mustangs. Cal Poly dominated this game, riding the coattails of a heroic performance by running back Joe Prothero, who had 43 carries for 228 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Bears will start off this season on the wrong side of a 44-15 blowout. Dartmouth started their season off at home against Patriot League opponent Georgetown. Dartmouth came ready to play in front of their home crowd Saturday as they dismantled the Hoyas. The Big Green were led by outstanding performances by running back Rashad Cooper, who had 112 yards and a touchdown, and receiver Drew Honeycutt, who had 4 catches for 102 yards and a score. Dartmouth starts off the season on the right foot as they handled the Hoyas 41-0 in the inaugural game of the season. In our last game of the week, we saw Princeton take on the Butler Bulldogs in Indiana. The Tigers came out and absolutely blew out Butler in this one, led by quarterback John Lovett, who threw for 177 yards and 2 touchdowns and ran for 48 yards and 2 more touchdowns. Princeton hung up 50 points on Butler this weekend. The Tigers won this contest by the biggest margin in the Ivy League this week as they crushed the Bulldogs 50-7. Now let's take a quick look at next week's slate of games in the Ivy League. Princeton comes home to host Monmouth. Dartmouth hits the road to take on Holy Cross. Columbia travels to Georgetown for next week's contest. Penn will stay home to take on Lehigh. Brown will host Harvard to open up their Ivy League play. Finally, Cornell will host Yale in their first in-conference matchups of the season. That's it for this week in the Ivy League. For Football Gameplan's FCS Whiparound, I'm Ian Gridley, and I'll see you next week.
Week 3 was a rough one for teams in the MEAC who went 0-4 over the weekend. Bethune-Cookman lost 49-28 against Florida Atlantic. Florida A&M lost a close game against Jackson State 18-16, and Morgan State narrowly lost to Albany 30-27. Howard and Savannah State had their game postponed due to Hurricane Florence. Going into Week 4, North Carolina A&T are still at the top at 3-0, with North Carolina Central and Norfolk State chasing at 1-1. Looking ahead to Week 4, the conference schedule will get underway with some marquee matchups. A&T will host Morgan State, Florida A&M will look to get back to 500 against Savannah State, and Norfolk State will travel to South Carolina State. But the big game of the week will feature the Bethune-Cookman Wildcats, who look to get back on track against the Howard Bison. For the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm David Hassagen.
Welcome to Week 3. After a wild Week 2 that saw the conference and school records fall and the Valley go 6-3, including 2-1 in the final week of the Big Sky Missouri Valley Football Conference Challenge to capture the series 5-3. Missouri State continued their scoring output by putting up 40 points in their upset of number 20 Northern Arizona. Youngstown State got their first win of the season against Valparaiso. North Dakota State continued to roll against North Alabama. Indiana State won a shootout against Eastern Illinois behind Jaquan Key's 232 rushing yards and 4 TDs. And in the most exciting game I've watched so far this season, Western Illinois came back from 10 points down with 6 minutes to go behind Sean McGuire's 360 yards and 3 TDs. And South Dakota State rewrote the history books multiple times in their game in its 90-6 blowout of Arkansas Pine Bluff. They set a new conference record for points with 90 and new school records for total offense with 926 yards, passing yards with 557, and passing touchdowns with 8. Quarterback Tynan Christian also became the conference all-time leader in touchdown passes. Looking ahead at Week 3, there's only 3 non-conference games scheduled. Let's start off by heading to number 22 Northern Iowa, where the Panthers host Hampton. After a hard-fought battle with FBS Iowa, the Panthers will look for their first win of the season. To North Dakota State, where the number 1 Bison hosts CAA rival Delaware in the Fargo Dome. They will look to continue their monster running game, which has 6 touchdowns in 2 games and has been so good that quarterback Easton Stick has only had to throw the ball 26 times this season. And finally, to Illinois State, where the number 15 Redbirds host FBS Colorado State. Quarterback Brady Davis will look to continue his hot start to the season as he has 5 touchdowns already to go along with his great running back duo of Robinson and Smith. Now to this week's Conference Players of the Week. Offensive honors goes to Indiana State's running back Jaquan Keyes, who had 232 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns. Defensive honors goes to Missouri State linebacker Tyler Lovelace, who has 2 takeaways and 3 tackles, including a pair of solo stops. And special team honors goes to Western Illinois kick returner Steve McShane, who had a return of 58 yards for a touchdown that sparked the Leathernecks' improbable comeback. For the FCS Whiparound on Football Gameplan, I'm Brian Sullivan.
What a week in the NEC. We had some thrilling wins, but also some downright disappointing performances. Bryce Wilson threw for 375 yards and 3 touchdowns in Bryant's 37-27 win against Marist. Although Dolagala threw for 320 yards, the Blue Devils were held to only 45 yards rushing in the 41-24 loss to Columbia. Dayton couldn't contain the Duke's lethal duo of Parr and Crawford. Parr threw for 333 yards and 3 touchdowns, while Crawford had 223 yards and 2 scores in their 31-26 win against the Flyers. Robert Morris had a tough time against James Madison in their 73-7 loss. Robert Morris was outgained 391-82 yards in the first half alone. Tyler Wilkins caught a 6-yard touchdown with 2 seconds, giving Richmond a 29-27 lead against St. Francis. The Spiders would end up beating the Red Flash in a heartbreaker, 35-27. And we've come to that time. We have our first NEC matchups of the season to look forward to this week. 2-1 Bryant hosts 1-2 Robert Morris. The Colonials are coming off an absolute disaster of a game against James Madison, while Bryce Wilson is coming off another strong performance, throwing for 375 yards and 3 TDs. We'll see if the running game of the Bulldogs can capitalize on a Colonial defense that gave up 386 yards on the ground to James Madison. 2-0 Sacred Heart travels to 1-2 Wagner in this NEC showdown. The Seahawks are coming off 2 straight losses as they fell to Montana State last week. Not only will the Wagner defense have to step up after 2 straight losses, but whichever quarterback is starting for them will have to as well. Each of the 3 Seahawk QBs threw a pick. 1-2 Central Connecticut State hopes to get their season back on track as they travel to the winless Fordham. The Rams have an anemic running game all season, but were held to -7 yards last week against Stony Brook. Fordham gave up 311 rushing yards to Stony Brook, so look for the Blue Devils to try to get their running game, which was held to only 45 yards last week, going early. 3-1 Duquesne hopes to keep their 3-game winning streak alive as they travel to Hawaii to take on the Warriors. Will the Dukes be able to hold Hawaii's Cole McDonald in check? In 4 games this season, McDonald erupted for 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns. Even in last week's loss to Army, McDonald threw for 300 yards. 2-1 St. Francis travels to 1-2 Albany. Albany's coming off a win against Morgan State in which freshman Dev Holmes had 8 receptions for 238 yards. The Red Flash defense must be hoping they can force some turnovers as Testaverde threw 4 interceptions last week. Albany also gave up 229 yards on the ground, which could be good for Jordan Toney. This is Scott Glennon with your FCS Whiparound.
After 3 weeks of non-conference games, we know one thing about the Ohio Valley Conference. The offensive sides are ready for conference play to start up. After a week in which there were 584 total points scored in 7 games involving the OVC, the question is, whose defense will show up when it matters most? This past week saw Tennessee Tech travel to Logan, Utah to take on the Utah State Aggies. The Golden Eagles would lose 73-12, but Nick Madonia would make 4 field goals in this game, including one from 54 yards out. That's enough to earn Nick my OVC Special Teams Player of the Week award. Now, in other action around the league, Murray State lost to FBS foe Kentucky 48-10. UT Martin lost a tough battle to SoCon's Chattanooga 34-24. And Eastern Kentucky had 2 shots to tie with 8 seconds left, but both Dakota Allen passes fell incomplete, and the Colonels lost to Bowling Green 42-35. Sophomore linebacker Steven Crowder had 11 total tackles, a sack, and an interception in this game, earning himself my OVC Defensive Player of the Week award. Austin Peay scored a school record 11 touchdowns in a 78-40 rout of Morehead State. Southeast Missouri scored the winning touchdown with 25 seconds left to beat Southern Illinois in the War for the Wheel 48-44. And Eastern Illinois quarterback Jonathan Brantley threw for 443 yards and 4 touchdowns, 3 of which went to Alexander Hollins. But the Panthers came up short against Indiana State, losing 55-41. Brantley was the first Panther quarterback since Jimmy Garoppolo to throw for 400-plus yards, and with 4 touchdowns, he earned Co-Offensive Player of the Week this week. Now, the other player to earn Co-Offensive Player of the Week was Marquise Terry of Southeast Missouri. The preseason All-American running back ran for an Ohio Valley Conference record 311 yards and 4 touchdowns in the Red Hawks game against Southern Illinois. Now, looking at the standings, no one has played a conference game yet, so Tennessee State, who has had back-to-back games canceled because of weather, is on top at 1-0 overall. Conference play starts up this week, though, and the marquee matchup will be Austin Peay at UT Martin. Tennessee State travels to Charleston to play Eastern Illinois. Southeast Missouri is at Eastern Kentucky, and Jacksonville State returns to action as the Gamecocks host Tennessee Tech. For the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Luke Jackson.
Week 3 in the SoCon was another exciting one, starting with a pair of upsets that will shake things up moving forward. The 8th-ranked Wofford Terriers were defeated by Wyoming 17-14 in what was a hard-fought back-and-forth game. Quarterback Tyler Vanderwall threw a 9-yard touchdown pass with 17 seconds left that capped a frantic 80-yard drive and lifted Wyoming to a come-from-behind victory. After a school-best 671 yards last week against VMI, the Terriers were hoping their offense would shine again against the Wyoming defense that was shredded the previous 2 weeks. For most of the game, it was the defense that rose to the occasion. The last drive soured an otherwise outstanding effort, and Wofford fell to 1-20 against FBS competition. In another upset of the week, freshman quarterback Robert Riddle threw for 316 yards and 1 score and ran for 2 more touchdowns as Mercer opened Southern Conference play by holding off Samford 30-24 on Saturday afternoon. Cole Fisher booted 3 field goals, including a 33-yarder to end the first half, to provide the needed cushion for the victory. Mercer was thrashed by Memphis in the season opener, then beat Jacksonville 45-3 before snapping an 8-game losing streak to the Bulldogs. In In the 3 other games in the SoCon this week, you had East Tennessee State hold off VMI 27-24. Karan DeLince made East Tennessee State's 5th interception of the game with 2 minutes and 4 seconds left, helping the Buccaneers to a victory on Friday night in the SoCon opener, moved ahead a day because of Hurricane Florence. Western Carolina took care of Gardner-Webb 28-10. Connell Young had 171 total yards and 2 touchdowns to help Western Carolina secure the win on Friday night in a game also played early because of Hurricane Florence. And in the final game on Saturday, Chattanooga dominated UT Martin in the first half and held on to win 34-24. Moving on to week 4 in the SoCon, you've got a nice 4-game slate starting with winless VMI going up against undefeated Western Carolina. Look for the Catamounts to control this game and come out with another victory on Saturday. The Citadel, looking to get their first win of the season, take on a Mercer team who look to carry momentum from their win last week. Watch out for the running game of Mercer in this one. The Bears have 3 capable rushers that all average around 5.5 yards per carry. The Furman Paladins try to change their losing ways when they travel to Tennessee to take on East Tennessee State. Don't count out the 0-2 Paladins just yet, as they play their first conference game of the year. And finally, FCS Stats Game of the Week is Samford versus Chattanooga. I expect Samford to go down again this week and fall to 0-2 in the conference. Keep an eye on junior quarterback Nick Tiano, who threw for 208 yards and 2 touchdowns last week. I expect him to surpass those totals and lead Chattanooga to another victory this Saturday. All right, folks, until next week, for the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Chris Strover.
Week 3 in the SWAC saw conference teams struggle against ranked and FBS teams as Arkansas Pine Bluff gave up 90 points to number 3 ranked South Dakota State. Alabama State fell to Kennesaw State 62-13. Alabama A&M lost to Cincinnati 63-7. And Prairie View A&M got handled by UNLV 46-17. On some high notes, Southern U beat Langston 33-18, and in the first conference matchup of the season, Alcorn State beat Texas Southern 27-15. Taking a look over at the standings, Alcorn State sits atop the East with Jackson State, Alabama A&M, Alabama State, and Mississippi Valley State rounding out the standings. Over in the West, Arkansas Pine Bluff sits atop in the standings with Texas Southern, Prairie View A&M, and Grambling rounding out the West. Week 4 in the SWAC is full of conference matchups as Alabama A&M takes on Southern U. Prairie View A&M faces Arkansas Pine Bluff in what should be the conference game of the week. The 2-time defending SWAC champs, the Grambling Tigers, look to pick up their first victory of the season as they host Alabama State. Alcorn State goes up against Mississippi Valley State, and Texas Southern battles Houston on the road. For the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Max Bazzone.